Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 5 wide receiver rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about some news around the National Football League, then talking about matchups at the wide receiver position. Then we'll close out today's episode with my top 36 wide receiver rankings going into Week 5. Before we begin today's video, let me thank you guys for the incredible support. We're almost at 29,000 subscribers, so if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We're going to be creating fantasy football content here for the entirety of the 2020 season. Do not forget, Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kick off with Kiorkof live stream, answering questions, updated rankings, all that kind of stuff. For those of you who are trying to find extra content outside of the weekly grind that we do here, you can go to patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof, link down in the description of the video for those of you who are looking to find flex rankings and other content like the private Discord. Outside of that, make sure you click the like button today. Many of you heard me. We got to 2,000 yesterday. If we can get 2,000 likes again this week and keep that on pace, I'd really do appreciate that. Outside of that, let's go ahead and let's start talking about a couple pieces of information. First and foremost, in terms of news around the National Football League. As of right now, more players from the Tennessee Titans have tested positive. One formerly that we've been talking about for the last couple weeks, Corey Davis, wide receiver of the Tennessee Titans, tested positive. That's the second starting wide receiver outside of Corey Davis. Adam Humphries last week also tested positive. So they're definitely going to be struggling. And I don't even know if there's going to be a Tennessee Titans game this week against the Buffalo Bills. So to be honest, I would start preparing for the likelihood that that game is not going to go through. If you need to go ahead and pick up another quarterback off of waivers in order to put them on your bench just in case, I would go ahead and say that you should probably approach that because there is a very high likelihood that that game could get potentially canceled this week. The cornerback for the New England Patriots, Stefon Gilmore, he tested positive earlier today. That's the third New England Patriot, including Cam and a different player from the practice squad. So there's a lot of cases coming up. Honestly, games could get canceled, so we're going to have to prepare. It's going to be a matter of just luck. The entire COVID situation, whether your players get sick or not, it's just going to be luck. And unfortunately, that on top of the fact that fantasy football is very difficult to predict the future, even though we do our best possibly to do so, this extra variable is definitely going to make it much more difficult for us to find success on a weekly basis. But we're just going to have to power through. You got to stay positive. Have at least a level-headed mindset. Don't overreact. Don't freak out. Don't try to trade all your players away because it could just be a one-week basis. And if you take a 1 week L, so be it. But regardless, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start talking about some Week 5 wide receiver rankings now that we've covered a little bit of the news in terms of the potential that we could be missing some games later this week. So let's start talking about some matchups at the wide receivers position, beginning with the teams that give up the most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season in a half PPR scoring format. Now, as of right now, the Seattle Seahawks are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers, 53.5 points per game. Even with Ryan Fitzpatrick not throwing a passing touchdown last week, he was still able to find DeVante Parker for 10 catches, over 100 receiving yards. Isaiah Ford got himself involved, Preston Williams here and there. So again, Seattle's defense has not been able to stop many opposing offenses. And the Minnesota Vikings, with their two stud wide receivers, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, have themselves great matchups this week. The Dallas Cowboys, they themselves definitely got hurt heavily by Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry this past week. But again, they take on the New York Giants this upcoming week. Darius Slayton, that's potentially the best play out of that team. And then Golden Tate, those are the two leading receivers. Potentially, we could see some uptick in opportunity and production from an Evan Ingram, but we'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about quarterbacks and tight end rankings. Outside of that, the Cleveland Browns playing against the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe Phillip Rivers wants to throw T.Y. Hilton the ball like more than 3 times in a game this year. This would be the game if he was going to do so. Seattle playing against Minnesota. Again, both those teams are going to be in a shootout of sorts. Denver giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. We're not 100% certain if Brian Hoyer or Jarrett Stidham is going to be given the starting job as of right now for the New England Patriots. I'm just kind of holding my breath, waiting to see. Either way, I think Edelman could, and N'Keal Harry are probably the best options. I know Bird had himself a pretty good game last week, but we're just keeping an eye on that. Outside of that, this kind of gives you a little bit of perspective as to which teams are giving a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. We'll go ahead and look at the tougher matchups. The Kansas City Chiefs, always tough against the opposing wide receiver. That's going to make it hard for a guy like Henry Ruggs, if in fact he returns this week. Hunter Renfrow. These are receivers that could potentially struggle based on the matchup. The Washington football team playing it pretty well against opposing wide receivers. They will be taking on the Los Angeles Rams. I'm not really worried about the Rams receivers. Kupp and Woods should be great to go. The Chicago Bears, Thursday night against a very undermanned Tampa Bay squad. I mean, they have already said that Chris Godwin, Justin Watson, are not going to play. LaShawn McCoy not going to play. Leonard Fournette going to be doubtful for the game. O.J. Howard, like I mentioned, out. So it is basically Scotty Miller, injured Mike Evans, and Gronkowski. So, and of course, Ronald Jones. But we'll see how that goes. Just to kind of give you some perspective as to which teams don't really give up too many points to opposing wide receivers. Now that we've seen this, we can go ahead and move on and start talking about our weekly rankings here. All right, these are our top 36 wide receiver rankings for week 5 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Starting off with my number 1 wide receiver, we have ourselves DeAndre Hopkins. Shouldn't be a surprise. You're automatically starting him. Plays against the New York Jets. The New York Jets are abysmal. They will have Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback this week, even with Le'Veon Bell returning. I am so skeptical as to what kind of production we're going to see from that offense. I know that Arizona was very lackluster last week with Kyler Murray's inconsistencies and his average depth of target being extremely low. The pressure was getting to him, and obviously he wasn't able to perform up to pace. But against the New York Jets, this seems like a very easy matchup. An automatic play for DeAndre Hopkins. Hopefully, he is kind of healed throughout the week from the ankle injury that was nagging him last week that he played through. If he's going to continue to play through injuries, it's obviously going to show in his play when he's not catching the ball 10 plus times for 100 yards. But hopefully, he'll get back on track this week with that. Even in a bad game last week, he still had 7 grabs for 41 yards. A lot of receivers would kill for that kind of opportunity in production. So as of right now, I'm 100% confident playing DeAndre Hopkins as my number 1 wide receiver this week. We move on to our number 2 and the thumbnail himself, Amari Cooper. The reason why I have Amari Cooper on the thumbnails was because mainly last week I talked about just wait till he gets touchdowns. I understand he's having these 100-yard games with no touchdowns and it's leaving him at around 13, 12 points, 14 points in a half PPR scoring format. But once he starts getting these touchdowns, it is going to take Amari Cooper to the next level. And that's what he did last week. 16 targets, 12 receptions, 134 receiving yards and a touchdown, 27.4 fantasy points. Now, the thing is, they take on the New York Giants, a very easy matchup in my opinion. But on top of it, I don't know if many people realize Amari Cooper is leading the league in targets as of right now and has the 3rd most receiving yards, only behind DK Metcalf and Stefon Diggs by 2 yards. As of right now, Amari Cooper, in terms of statistics, I mean, he's up there with the best. And that's why he's at my number 2 this week, because he's going to continue to be as consistent as he's been with Dak Prescott. This offense definitely isn't struggling in the second half of games. I don't care if it's garbage time. This is fantasy football, and garbage time is a part of the game. And if we're going to continue to just key in on that with Amari Cooper, we're just going to continue to rack up points going forward. So he's my number 2. We move on to number 3, Tyreek Hill. I mean, can you ask for more? Tyreek Hill has scored 4 touchdowns back-to-back weeks. I mean, it is incredible that he has scored this many touchdowns thus far this season, but that is the consistency that we love to see. Even if he's not getting 10-plus targets, even though he's not getting the 100-yard receiving games, it's fine because these touchdowns are making it even for him. This upcoming week, they take on the Las Vegas Raiders. If he can put up the numbers he put up last week against that great secondary with Gilmore and McCourty, having 4 catches for 64 yards and a receiving touchdown, I'm very confident that regardless of what they put in front of him, Patrick Mahomes, this team is going to deliver on a weekly basis. They're getting all of their receivers involved. Tyreek Hill, it was practically a rushing touchdown because they're doing these little shovel passes forward. But if you get him out in the open field, you get him the ball when he's running full speed, it's really hard to defend him and respectively this offense. And they've been clicking on all cylinders as 4-0. Anyway, he's my number 3 in an automatic start this week. We move on to DK Metcalf as my number 4. DK Metcalf had a little bit of a slow week last week, but honestly, he should have had a touchdown. Late in the second half, had himself a play where he broke a couple tackles on the sideline, dove for the pylon, was deemed out at the 1-yard line because he stepped out. Should have had, the 4 catches for 106 yards and a touchdown. He should have had, once again, another 17-point week. Unfortunately, ended up with about 12.5 points, but not a big deal because this upcoming week, they take on the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not 100% certain as the health of Mike Hughes. Mike Hughes, the starting cornerback of the Minnesota Vikings, missed last week. He could potentially miss once again this week and give, our DK Metcalf another opportunity at greatness in another one of these shootouts. Again, his opportunity has been stable over the weeks. His amount of receptions has been 4 every week, if I'm not mistaken. He's getting over 100 receiving yards. He's as consistent as advertised. And going forward, continue to being one of these automatic plays at wide receiver. We move on to Adam Thielen. Like I mentioned, this is going to be a shootout. Even with Kirk Cousins struggling here and there, he has the ability to find Adam Thielen consistently. I know a lot of people during the Sunday morning live streams, again, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Come check us out. Many of you were voicing your opinion and saying that I'm nervous about Adam Thielen. He's been very inconsistent, but I'm telling you, as their schedule begins to get easier, you play Seattle this week, Atlanta the following week, these secondaries are not capable of stopping a receiver at the caliber of Adam Thielen, despite how bad potentially Kirk Cousins might play. I think Adam Thielen, his opportunity and his production is going to be there consistently. Last week, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 114 receiving yards and a touchdown, 22.2 points. Again, they take on the easiest strength of schedule team, the team that's giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers this week. Adam Thielen's a stud. Calvin Ridley's my number 6, and even though Calvin Ridley disappeared, he was dealing with an ankle injury late last week. And going into the Monday night matchup, we weren't 100% certain if he was going to play, but he did play. He played probably through an injury, but the problem that I saw was this offense kind of gave up. With Julio going down and the way that Matt Ryan was producing and playing, I mean, they're in some trouble. If you're a Calvin Ridley owner, I'm not 100% too concerned because when Julio Jones goes down, there's going to be more opportunity for Calvin Ridley to step up and once again be the number 1 wide receiver for this team. But again, it is concerning that if he's going to continue to play through injuries, how is that going to potentially limit him? Having 5 targets, 0 receptions, and 0 points in a singular week is detrimental. I'm guaranteeing you that it cost many of you a week here. It surely did for me, and it's unfortunate. But that being said, I still trust in Calvin Ridley going forward. Another one of these top wide receivers for 2020 and in this upcoming week against the Carolina Panthers secondary that I don't think is very good. We move on to Tyler Lockett, another one of the Seattle Seahawks. Again, should be a back and forth matchup. But again, I think that the Seattle Seahawks are a far better passing offense. They've proven that over the last couple of weeks with Russell Wilson, his ability to get it done through the air. Now, Tyler Lockett, I don't know what it is, just had to disappear last week. It's unfortunate that that was the case against Miami. I know Miami had their 2 starting cornerbacks, Byron Jones, Xavier Howard. They were pretty much equipped, ready for that, passing attack, and they definitely showed that because it was a lower scoring, affair than we anticipated from Russell Wilson. That being said, Tyler Lockett's opportunity wasn't there, but it was mainly because they were just running the ball a lot. I mean, when Chris Carson is getting himself 20 plus touches, that in itself is going to obviously make a huge difference. David Moore got himself a little bit involved in scoring an open touchdown for the Seattle Seahawks. Took a little bit of opportunity away from Lockett, but regardless, I think Lockett's still within the top 5 wide receivers in fantasy. I do trust him, and I'm going to continue to play him. Mike Evans is my number 8. Again, Mike Evans had an incredible performance this past week as the solo wide receiver of this team. Now, sure, Scotty Miller's contributing a lot, but what Mike Evans was able to do, fighting through injury, limping around the field, and really carrying this team to the next level last week. 8 targets, 7 receptions, $122 and a touchdown, 19.6 fantasy points. He has been absolutely fantastic. He's scoring a touchdown every single week, and it's just going to continue to get there. I mean, Tom Brady has really found a connection here with Mike Evans because of the absence of Chris Godwin. And going into this upcoming Thursday night's matchup, I expect Mike Evans, a really tough wide receiver. I mean, he's really going to prove mind over matter as he really struggles with this ankle injury and gets through it. Regardless, I expect Mike Evans to have himself a pretty good week here against Chicago. I don't think Chicago's secondary will be able to stop this offense, that easily. It should be a back and forth matchup. Again, both these teams on short weeks dealing with injuries and as such. But again, Tom Brady's going to be looking to hard, tunnel in on Mike Evans in terms of targets and just funnel it in his direction going into Thursday. Speaking of the Thursday night matchup, we have Allen Robinson as my number, what is it? Oh goodness, I moved it off screen. My number 9 wide receiver for this upcoming week. Allen Robinson, he's getting back on track. He's getting to the pace that he had last year that a lot of people, drafted him as a top 12 wide receiver this year for. Again, Allen Robinson last season was consistent throughout the back end of the year, but now that he's found Nick Foles in this offense and we don't have the inconsistencies or potential inconsistencies of a Mitchell Trubisky, we're going to find Allen Robinson putting up top 12 numbers every single week. Last week, 10 targets, 7 receptions for a 101 and a touchdown. We love to see that's 2 weeks in a row of over 100 yards and a touchdown. That's going to just continue to stay on pace. Tampa Bay secondary has struggled with opposing wide receiver. Just look at what the Chargers did this past week against them with a bunch of no-name guys outside of Keenan Allen in terms of the receiver position. But as of right now, very confident in the potential of Allen Robinson this week. We move on to ourselves having Stefon Diggs at number 10. Again, There's a potential that this game gets canceled, but I'm just going to hope that Stefon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills do end up playing against the Tennessee Titans this upcoming week. Hopefully everyone's healthy and ready to go. That being said, Stefon Diggs has been consistent as ever. He has truly found himself a number one wide receiver spot for a team. When he played for Minnesota, there was a lot of inconsistencies, especially last year because of the run-heavy approach. But even in years prior, there were games in which he would disappear and Adam Thielen would be a monster, or vice versa. Having the number one command of this team and an offense that wants to uncork the ball because of the ability of Josh Allen to just with relative ease throw a 70-yard bomb, it's allowed Stefon Diggs to really flourish in this offense. 6 catches for 115. Again, like I mentioned earlier, him and DK Metcalf lead the league in receiving yards right now with 403 a pop. Against Tennessee, against the secondary that I'm not 100% confident they can stop Diggs and this Buffalo Bills offense, should be a great play. Moving on to number 11, Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, you for the back-to-back weeks have been great. I mean, we love to see it. Cooper Kupp, early on this season, wasn't somebody that we were 100% banging the table for and saying, Cooper Kupp is a monster. Here we go again. We were a little concerned when it started, and we didn't really see Jared Goff looking for him. But in back-to-back weeks, he's getting consistent targets, finding himself in the end zone, and that's the Cooper Kupp we know and love. Because again, he is the safety blanket of Jared Goff. And when Jared Goff really needs to find someone down in the red zone, last year with 10 touchdowns, one of only 2 receivers last season, only Cooper Kupp and Kenny Golladay had 10-plus receiving touchdowns last year. Cooper Kupp's potentially getting on pace to find himself in that conversation once again this year. Playing against the Washington football team, 100% confident with it. I know that they've been tough against opposing wide receivers thus far this season in terms of fantasy points given in a half PPR scoring basis, but Cooper Kupp is an automatic play, and he's going to find himself in the end zone potentially once again this week in a great matchup. We move on to Keenan Allen. We talked about Keenan Allen a little bit yesterday in our video about trade targets. If you have not checked that out, go check it out. I talked about a couple players that, at each position, running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, that I'm looking to potentially go and trade for as like potential buy low candidates. I know Keenan Allen didn't have the greatest performances last week, but he is, as of right now, number 2 in targets in the National Football League, and in an offense that without Austin Eckler is going to continue to have to give him the ball and give him more opportunity. This upcoming week, a lot of Keenan Allen's value is going to be determined by the health of the secondary of the New Orleans Saints. As of right now, last week, Janoris Jenkins and Marshawn Lattimore were out. If there's a potential that they can miss once again, I think that even helps Keenan Allen more, but regardless, I think Keenan Allen is such a great wide receiver. He's matchup proof at this point and should have himself another great week. Last week, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 62 yards, and 10 plus fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. But again, he always has the potential to go above and beyond that. That's why he sits at number 12. Number 13, JuJu Smith-Schuster coming off a bye week. Let's not forget JuJu Smith-Schuster in this offense with Pittsburgh. He's going to score. I think, what does he have? 3 touchdowns in the first 3 weeks of the season. That's a great number to see. But as well, he is the number 1 wide receiver of this team. I know he doesn't get as many targets as Diontae Johnson. But that being said, I know JuJu Smith-Schuster is going to be pulling probably the best coverage. If in fact Darius Slayton is to miss this week, I know he was helped off the field last week. He might play. Even if he does, I'm still confident with JuJu Smith-Schuster as the number 1 receiver this week. Again, they move him around the formation, they move him into the slot, move him out wide, and they're going to find themselves in pretty advantageous positions against the defense that, again, overall as a whole, isn't great in the back end in terms of their secondary. I know they've tried over the last couple of years to improve it, but I think JuJu Smith-Schuster, regardless, will be able to take advantage of a little bit of the weaknesses there. We move on to number 14, DJ Chark. Chark, after coming back from that injury, being knocked out on that Thursday night game between Miami and Jacksonville prior to the game even starting, a lot of us were panicking. Keelan Cole, Laviska Shenault, what are we going to pick up? And being kind of given really bad performances from Jacksonville receivers, it kind of left a dirty taste in our mouth. But going into this past week, it was an automatic success because Mackenzie Alexander, their number 1 cornerback for the Cincinnati Bengals, was out. And we knew DJ Chark was going to be able to take advantage of it because that offense looked like they were missing DJ Chark the week prior. They 100% keyed in on the fact that they needed him, and he produced 9 targets, 8 receptions, 95 receiving yards, and not 1, but 2 receiving touchdowns this past week. Many of you guys are probably benefiting from the 25.5 points he had last week in a half PPR scoring format. This upcoming week, they take on Houston. Another one of these easy matchups in terms of the wide receiver position. Should be a back-and-forth matchup of scoring. I'm excited about the Jacksonville-Houston matchup because, again, a lot of people might not see this as a higher scoring event. I personally do. Should be exciting for DJ Chark as a number 1 wide receiver of Jacksonville. We move on to Robert Woods in my number 15. Again, Robert Woods had a little bit of a down week this past week against the New York Giants. Again, the offense for the Rams as a whole had an off week. Goff was pretty much nothing. Higbee was nothing. Woods was nothing. And both the running backs, relatively nothing. Only Cooper Kupp was relevant in terms of fantasy production. But let's not forget, Robert Woods is a 10-point minimum guy with potential upside. This season, in a half PPR, about 15, 10, and 18. And then just this past week had like a 6-point performance. Those 6-point performances are few and far between, and I think going forward should be another one of these guys that you can consistently rely upon. The targets will be there. I know this past week the targets weren't the greatest numbers going forward, but 7 targets, 6 receptions, 35 yards. Those yardage numbers, not the greatest, but eventually that'll start to pick up. We know how capable he is of being a upper tier wide receiver. So I think this week he'll bounce back against Washington. He's my number 15. Number 16, Will Fuller. Will Fuller having fantasy production is one of my favorite things to see. I really do like Will Fuller as a wide receiver. He stays healthy, he is going to produce, especially against these easy matchups. Last week against Minnesota, he took advantage of it. 6 catches for 108 and a touchdown. Should have had a second touchdown on the very last play of the Houston drive there. 4th down, catches the ball, obviously, while coming down, has a little bit of possession, but the ball hits the floor, pops out. Very unfortunate situation because you have yourself a 25, 26-point week from Will Fuller if, in fact, that touchdown happens. But either way, he's caught the eye of Deshaun Watson. Outside of Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks is pretty much non-existent. Randall Cobb gets a couple stuff here and there. Kenny Stills here and there. But outside of everything, it is Will Fuller as the number 1 receiver of this offense against Jacksonville. Very confident about the matchup. And I think going into this week, should continue to see a lot of production going in his direction. We find ourselves with DeVante Parker at number 17. Again, Parker, over 12 targets for 10 receptions, 111 yards, 110 yards, last week. The amount of production he saw, not a surprise. This upcoming week, they take on the San Francisco 49ers, and though a lot of people may think that's a matchup you want to completely avoid, I don't really see it as such. Ryan Fitzpatrick still the starting quarterback as of Brian Flores, the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and going into this week, I see a pretty good matchup because if Emmanuel Mosley is going to be out, and that's their number 1 cornerback. And I think their number 2 cornerback was also out last week. If their starting cornerbacks are out again, once again this week, or we see a little bit of a one of them missing, one or the other, we could see DeVante Parker with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is obviously going to funnel target in his direction. He's going to find himself some production. I can assure you that. So I'm pretty excited about the potential of Parker going forward. He should be great here as number 17. Number 18. Tyler Boyd. Speaking of consistency and guys that we can 100%, without a doubt, start every single week, Tyler Boyd has been that for the last 3 weeks. Week 1 was that overreaction Monday little situation where everyone was freaking out. Week 2, we took it easy. We're like, you know what? Let's just see what we can find. He scores a touchdown, finds consistency. The following week is incredible. Has himself a bunch of yards, bunch of targets, bunch of receptions. He's continued that over the weeks with Joe Burrow, and that's going to continue to consist. Even with the Baltimore matchup, I'm not worried about it. I've seen Tyler Boyd produce against Baltimore. Last week, he had 7 catches for 90 yards. That is his baseline. That is literally his baseline minimum. And with A.J. Green a little banged up, T. Higgins taking the role on the outside, we're getting a little bit more production out of the backfield. This offense is starting to click more. And I think Tyler Boyd, another one of these automatic plays going forward. Terry McLaurin's my number 19. Now, Terry McLaurin, I can assure you, would be a little bit higher. But as of this morning, Kyle Allen was named the starting quarterback of the Washington football team. They are benching Dwayne Haskins as of right now. My issue with this entire situation is I don't really know what to expect from Kyle Allen, except for I've seen him play last year in this exact offense with the exact offensive coordinator. Now, the offensive coordinator is Norv Turner's son, former coach of the Chargers back in the day when they were in San Diego. But for those of you who are familiar with Scott Turner's offense, the way it functions is we want to feed the running back the ball out of the backfield, a little bit of the McCaffrey thing, and then they want to just funnel target their number 1 receiver, just like the way that Kyle Allen did with Christian McCaffrey last year in Carolina and with DJ Moore. If he's going to give as many targets to Terry McLaurin that he had last week, Terry McLaurin, 14 targets, 10 receptions for $118. If he's going to see that kind of production with Kyle Allen, no problem. But I'm a little worrisome. I'm just going to wait. Let's see how it goes. Either way, I'm starting Terry McLaurin because he's a stud. Even with Jalen Ramsey potentially being on him, not really worried about it. He should be great at number 19. Let's go. Moving on to 20, CeeDee Lamb. I'm here to apologize First and foremost, CeeDee Lamb. I did not believe CeeDee Lamb would be the number 2 wide receiver of this team. I thought for sure it would be Michael Gallup. There was no way to convince me out of it for a long time. It's taken me this long to finally realize that it truly is CeeDee Lamb as the number 2 wide receiver of this team. I mean, Michael Gallup is getting like the most, I think, snaps for that offense in terms of the wide receiver position. But he's like, I think he had how many catches? I think he had less catches than just about everybody in that offense. I think he had the fewest amount of catches amongst the entire offense, running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers that were active and actually getting targets. But regardless, CeeDee Lamb, incredible performance last week. They play against the New York Giants. Again, the way that this offense functions, they're going to throw the ball a lot. This could be a back and forth matchup, despite potentially their defense improving against Daniel Jones and the inabilities of that offense. I still think this offense is going to continue to produce. CeeDee Lamb has been incredible. Just this past week, had himself another one of these huge performances. That's 2 thus far this season, which he's popped heavily. 5 catches, 79 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Continuing to streak in the right direction, to say the very least. Moving on to Justin Jefferson. Now, I think Justin Jefferson might be a little low on my list. He might be. But, again, 2 back-to-back weeks of 100-plus receiving yards. Last week, 4 catches for 104, no touchdowns. The week prior, had himself 7 catches, 175, and a touchdown. I mean, the numbers have been incredible. You play against Seattle, the worst secondary in terms of giving up points to the wide receiver position. I mean, they're going to give up a bunch. I think Justin Jefferson, if he is given the ample amount of targets, which I'm hoping is the case, could honestly finish within the top 12 this week. He has that potential. So I'm not going to put it out of the realm of possibility. I just find myself a little bit more confident with some of these other receivers. But if you own 3 other receivers above Justin Jefferson right now in this list, then consider yourself pretty lucky, or consider yourself a pretty good drafter, because you've built yourself a pretty good roster thus far. We move on to having Robby Anderson as my number 22. We're going to get his name there. Perfect. Robby Anderson, as of right now, seems to be the number 1 wide receiver in Carolina. Play against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, that secondary struggling with, injuries, to say the least. Both starting cornerbacks, both starting safeties. Again, they are completely just screwed over in terms of the secondary and being able to cover opposing offenses. Robert Tonyan scoring 3 touchdowns seemed like a pretty relatively easy thing. Now with Teddy Bridgewater playing against that defense and finding, Robby Anderson to be, I guess, their number 1 receiving target. Again, last week they reestablished that. 11 targets, 8 receptions for 99 yards. That's going to continue. Then I'm going to trust Robby Anderson more than DJ Moore. And I think the matchup is far too clean to, kind of miss out on it. Now, speaking of DJ Moore, I still think with Robby Anderson being the number 1, I think DJ Moore is back-to-back going to be up in this conversation. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, number 23 and 22 is too low of a ranking for these guys. I would implore you to go and look at what the number 22 and number 23 wide receivers on a weekly basis in a half PPR format score. These are guys that score 14 to 16 points on a given week, okay? So don't freak out. These are still really good plays against Atlanta. I'm telling you they are. So again, just putting it out there, both of them should be good. There's the volatility of one or the other just popping off. And as of right now, I'm far more confident with Robby Anderson, but still confident with both of them in such an easy matchup. Okay, we move on and we find ourselves with A.J. Brown as my number 24. With Corey Davis getting COVID-19 and Adam Humphries getting COVID-19, this offense has never needed A.J. Brown, more than right now. A.J. Brown, if in fact they do play, is going to get back on track. I did a video yesterday talking about trade targets. I wanted to target A.J. Brown in my trades. I went and got him in a couple different places because, again, their upcoming schedule is relatively easy. He has been the number 1 wide receiver for this team since last year, about week 7 when Tannehill took over. In the last 6 weeks of the 2019 season, he was averaging 19.1 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, scoring a bunch of fantasy points for this offense, respectively. So again, hopefully he gets back on pace. Hopefully he's healthy, back from his bone bruise. And if in fact he is, he's going to be a monster going against this secondary of Buffalo. I'm not really too worried about Tre'Davious White. I know he's been good, but a lot of wide receivers have taken advantage of the matchup. Moving on to Diontae Johnson. Again, they play against Philadelphia. Diontae Johnson in weeks past has gotten 10-plus targets, has led this team in targets overall. I know he dealt with the concussion a couple weeks back, but he should be healthy considering the bye week last week, the impromptu bye week per se. But again, Diontae Johnson should be a great play going into this upcoming week against Philadelphia. Their secondary, not the greatest. If he's pulling the second best corner on this offense, It's what, Nikhil Roby-Coleman or LeBlanc. Maybe they put Slay on him, but to be honest, regardless of what it's going to be, I think Ben Roethlisberger in this offense is going to impose their will, have themselves a pretty good game with their, their receiving core, starting off with Diontae Johnson, but of course, JuJu Smith. We move on to Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton, back-to-back days in which I'm talking about them in unison, but regardless, Darius Slayton plays against the Dallas Cowboys. They're giving up the second most points to opposing wide receivers. They've given up a lot of points to guys over the last couple weeks in shootouts. Of course, we remember Calvin Ridley playing well against them. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, of course. This past week, OBJ and Jarvis Landry playing well. I mean, they're just giving up all the points to opposing wide receivers. If Chidobe Awuzie, their starting cornerback, is out once again, I'm taking advantage of this by playing Darius Slayton because, again, I do think he should be another one of these great plays. Moving on to Scotty Miller. Again, if in fact Mike Evans is going to play injured, there's a possibility Mike Evans goes out of this game early because of said injury, leaving. And I'm not kidding. Scotty Miller is the number one receiving option of this team. Some would say he already is potentially in line for some number one targets. Last week, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown, 16.8 fantasy points. This week plays against Chicago on a short week. He was dealing with a groin injury last week. This entire receiving core is beat up. But I can assure you that if they're going to pass the ball, they're going to have to be able to air it out to their wide receivers. And if Evans is going to get his, so is Scotty Miller, because you're not going to see Gronk getting 10-plus targets unless somehow magically we have a different kind of Gronk playing in the NFL this upcoming week. But again, Ronald Jones, he can get himself 9 targets, but it's not going to look anything different than it did last week. I think Scotty Miller's going to step up this week, have himself a pretty good performance as their slot receiver here. Moving on to Jamison Crowder as number 28. Joe Flacco is going to be a starting quarterback for the Jets, but the reason why Jamison Crowder is so successful in that offense is mainly because he's open all the time. They don't really have any outside threats in terms of the wide receiver position. Chris Herndon has been very lackluster. Sure, you get Le'Veon Bell back, but you play against the Arizona Cardinals, and this is a very good defense. They are not really going to let this New York Jets team really do much. So I expect a lot of dump-offs, potentially in the direction of Jamison Crowder, similar to how this offense has functioned with Sam Darnold. Wow, that's a deep pull. Anyway, with Sam Darnold at quarterback, I think Jamison Crowder, the amount of work he's gotten as the starting wide receiver of this team, I know he's significantly less of a quarterback when Darnold's not at the helm. But again, he's probably going to get himself potentially double-digit targets. And if Joe Flacco's got anything left in that arm, he'll be able to at least help Jamison Crowder put together a wide receiver 3 week here. Moving on to our number 29 receiver, we have ourselves Odell Beckham Jr. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, why in the heck is OBJ, who after having the number 1 fantasy week at the wide receiver position, sitting at your number 29? Well, I'll tell you why. Sure, OBJ had 8 targets for 5 receptions, 81 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. On top of that, 2 rushing attempts for 73 yards and a touchdown. Those are incredible numbers. 35.9 fantasy points playing against the Dallas Cowboys. But the reason why I have him at number 29 is something that I go back to even last week. If you didn't watch the OBJ section of last week's video, I quoted and I said that when I rank OBJ high, like within, for example, the rank 13 through 18 range, which he belongs in. Again, this is a top tier wide receiver. Regardless of matchups, he deserves to be in that range every week. But when I rank him in that range, to be honest, he just doesn't produce for me. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to counter jinx it because I know, as much as I said, I guarantee you I jinx players, people. I know I do it. Watch my hidden gems. I'm telling you, there's players that are supposed to have great weeks and they disappear. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, one of them. So again, every week from here on out, as long as OBJ keeps producing, we're going to leave him at 29, like I mentioned last week. If he produces at 29, I'm leaving him there. Again, he deserves to be a better wide receiver than here. But this week and forever, as long as he keeps producing, he's going to be my number 29. Moving on. Marquise Hollywood Brown. As of right now, Lamar Jackson missed Wednesday's practice. They're dealing with a little bit of a precautionary measure, hoping that his knee is doing okay. I'm assuming he'll be fine. Regardless, Marquise Brown, 8 targets, 4 receptions, 86 receiving yards, 10 fantasy points against the Washington football team. Plays against the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, Cincinnati, not one of the best defenses in the National Football League, but they've got a good secondary. I think Marquise Brown has the capabilities of, without a doubt, breaking off for one big play and scoring a touchdown, but I take it relatively easy. I don't really want to over project his potential. I think he's a solid play. But outside of being, number 30, he's too volatile, doesn't have the touchdown upside that other receivers have. So we leave him here for as of right now. Talking about our next wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, coming back from injury. Again, Deebo Samuel, even with the offseason, getting hurt, being projected to at least be ready for the beginning of the season, then was dealing with some pain in his foot. Of course, getting him back in week 5 of the 2020 season is going to pay dividends. With Jimmy Garoppolo potentially on pace to return, this offense getting Raheem Mostert back, George Kittle back, and having their first matchup against the Miami Dolphins, I'm very confident the potential of Deebo Samuel this week. Last week, he had a little bit of an introduction to this offense, got himself back involved, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 35 yards, had himself a couple rushing attempts for some yardage there. Again, Deebo Samuel at the back end of the 2019 season was a 15-point wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format on a consistent basis. So again, let's not forget what the capabilities of this offense are when everything's clicking and they're firing on all cylinders. Deebo Samuel is leading the charge of the wide receiver position and an incredible play going forward. So as of right now, in a tougher matchup, again, if Byron Jones, Xavier Howard, they're healthy, I still think that Deebo Samuel is a very capable wide receiver to produce. But again, he's still working his way back. He didn't have a preseason. He barely got, too many touches last week. He's getting back on pace. He should end up becoming a top 24 as the weeks progress, but as of right now, sits at my number 31. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves John Brown at number 32. Again, if the Buffalo Bills don't play, John Brown obviously is not a good start, but I think against the Tennessee Titans, I think Tennessee's definitely struggled against opposing wide receivers thus far this season. And just in general, the Tennessee defense is not as good as we kind of thought they were. And to be honest, with all the COVID-19 injuries and all the players that are going to be on the IR there, they're going to be undermanned. They're, one of their starting cornerbacks, one of their starting defensive ends, they're out. So again, this team is going to be underhanded or undermanned, And I think if the potential of John Brown in this Buffalo Bills offense starts to really go at him this week and put a lot of points on the board, I wouldn't be surprised. And that's kind of what I'm expecting. A little bit of a back and forth matchup of sorts. So John Brown, again, should be great going forward into this week. Julian Edelman's my number 33. Again, I don't really care who's at quarterback. I think the Kansas City matchup is definitely just tough. Regardless of who's at quarterback, it was a tougher matchup. It was close in the beginning, but then it eventually became the Super Bowl defending champions versus an average team in the National Football League, considering the quarterback play at hand from New England. Now, that's obviously going to be the biggest difference maker. If you don't have Cam Newton under center, you're not going to see as much creativity and or production from this offense. And you're not going to have as many, first downs and get more opportunities for an Edelman. You're going to have a lot of 3-and-out punting situations, which is definitely unfortunate, but Julian Edelman this week against Denver, I'm not really too worried about the matchup. I think this is something that they can very easily win, but they're going to have to give their best players the ball, and Edelman's one of those guys. Hopefully they can find him in the passing game more than they did last week. T.Y. Hilton. Now, hear me out. I understand. T.Y. Hilton has done nothing this year. He's warranted no respect and should not even be on this list. I understand it. They play Cleveland. I, for some reason, have a feeling this is the week. If it's not the week, you can drop him, but I feel like of all the receivers in this offense, I don't think it's going to be Zach Pascal or, Mo Alley-Cox with the 100-yard game because of one passing play that goes for, 35 yards and a touchdown or, 60 yards and a touchdown. T.Y. Hilton's the one that's capable of that. And I think, of course, they want to run the ball against the Cleveland Browns, but if that ends up kind of slowing down, Phillip Rivers is going to have to eventually show his arm. I know he was a good quarterback last year. I'm telling you. He was able to get Keenan Allen the ball, Hunter Henry the ball, Austin Eckler the ball. You got to get far more utilization out of T.Y. Hilton. This is a guy that was, a 1,200-yard receiver with 6 touchdowns a year on average with Andrew Luck. And I know Phillip Rivers ain't no Andrew Luck, but he's got to get somewhere close to it. Got to get more opportunities for T.Y. All right, Tre'Quan Smith is my number 35. Again, I think Michael Thomas is going to miss this week because, again, they have a bye week the following week. Why rush him back when you don't really have to get any production out of him? You're probably going to win against the Los Angeles Chargers regardless. So we got Tre'Quan Smith, the potential number 1 wide receiver here, playing 90% of the snaps in this offense. Again, I know he had less targets than an Emmanuel Sanders, but he is looking like the guy that is being used heavily in the red zone as an option. If Jared Cook misses again, I don't mind the opportunities and or contributions of a Tre'Quan Smith in this offense. The final option here is T. Higgins. Again, with A.J. Green dealing with some injuries, I think T. Higgins, another great option. I know they play against Baltimore. Not really worried about the situation because, again, if Baltimore's taking early leads, that is going to force Joe Burrow, second half, throw the ball a lot. Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. They're going to get themselves some great opportunities and find themselves some great fantasy production. Those are my top 36 wide receivers for week 5 of the 2020 fantasy football season. I want to thank you guys again for watching the channel, supporting the channel, clicking that like button, subscribing, commenting down below. I appreciate you guys. every single day coming out here and supporting the channel. It really does make a difference. And, I do it for you guys, so appreciate it. Tomorrow, we'll talk about quarterbacks and tight ends prior to Thursday night kickoff. Tampa Bay and Chicago. Should be an interesting matchup between the two. Anyway, appreciate you guys. Until tomorrow, thank you very much. Make sure, for those of you looking to try to find extra content, patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof. Information down below. Appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.